Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, my name is Zen Honeycutt. You are with us on the new MDs, moms, doctors, and scientists working together to heal our children, to heal our families. We have a powerhouse panel today. We are so thrilled to have you with us. I'm going to introduce our special guest first and then our regular panelists. Our special guest today is Dr. Renee Dufault. She is the author of this book, Unsafe at Any Meal. She is a world leader in the field of nutritional epigenetics. Her specific area of study is the effect of ultra-processed food consumption on the behavior of MT and PON1 genes in autism and ADHD. We're going to get very specific today, folks. She stumbled on some of the precise factors in the ultra-processed food supply that impact the expression of these genes while working as a researcher at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, otherwise known as the FDA. Dr. Dufault has developed effective health education intervention programs that include nutritional epigenetics instructions. We love that, nutrition and food as the solution. So we're super excited. Dr. Dufault is an independent. She's an independent researcher, which means she is not a salaried employee at any institution. So she is able to speak freely, folks. She is an independent researcher. She is a seasoned professional teacher and loves serving as a mentor as well. She is the author of 2 books that serve as a curriculum for teaching individuals or groups on how to switch to a healthy diet and improve health and birth outcomes. Welcome, Dr. Dufault. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Zen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome.
It really is.
Thank you. And we also have, of course, our panelists, our constant panelist and host for this entire new MD shows, Dr. Michelle Perro, MD. She's a 40-something-year pediatrician, and she is the author of What's Making Our Children Sick, How Industrial Food is Causing an Epidemic of Chronic Illness and What Parents and Doctors can do about it. Thank you, Dr. Perro.
Thank you.
And we also, of course, have one of our favorite scientists, Dr. Stephanie Seneff, the author of Toxic Legacy, How the Weed Killer Glyphosate is Destroying Our Health and the Environment. Welcome, Dr. Seneff.
Thank you.
Oh, and also, folks, my book is Unstoppable. I'm Zen Honeycutt, and I'm the founding executive director of Moms Across America. And I'm thrilled to facilitate this panel and ask questions now and then, because as a mom, you all know a worried mom does better research than the FBI. Well, we get on the case, and I see myself as somebody who can ask questions on behalf of all the moms out there that might be wondering what's going on with the food supply, why are our children sick? So it's really an honor to be able to speak with these brilliant women today. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Zen.
Great. Thank you. All right, so let's get right into it. We have this book, Unsafe at Any Meal, what the FDA does not want you to know about the foods you eat, and your book also, Nutrition Epigenetics, Unsafe at Any Meal Study Guide. These 2 books, thank you so much for doing that. Tell us why, first of all, why did you get into this? Can you give us a little bit more background on your work, and how did you end up going from the FDA to writing this book and being so vocal, particularly about mercury and heavy metals in the food? Can you tell us why?
Sure. How I got into it was I accidentally made a finding of mercury in high fructose corn syrup. It wasn't intentional. I stumbled on it because I was doing a presentation for the U.S. Geological Survey Conference, and they wanted me to do the mercury cycle because of some of the work I had been doing. And mercury was sort of my forte, mercury contamination and whatnot. And so when I found the mercury in the high fructose corn syrup, and then I did my research, and I put together a model of what it would do to you, what it would do to your body, and based on the gene that you need to work properly to excrete it. So I was looking at the metallifying, or the MT gene, which you have to have working properly in order to excrete mercury. And the thing that I did, and the toe I stepped on, was the current paradigm was that the biggest source of mercury exposure was from fish. Methyl mercury was the culprit. FDA had, warnings about eating fish, and so here I was saying that that isn't what's going on. We've got mercury in the food supply. I mean, you're eating 2 pounds of fish a year and you're having 60 pounds of high fructose corn syrup a year with mercury. I felt like that mercury in the high fructose corn syrup was a big problem.
So hang on one second. You said on average people eat how many pounds of fish a year?
Well, at the time, 2 to 3 pounds per year of fish, each individual. Well,
Really?
that's not
People
a lot.
eat that little fish?
Yes, they don't
In
eat a
some
lot
parts
of
of the
fish.
country, but
So
certainly.
so then you have
And then hang on a second. You said 60 pounds of corn syrup a year. People are
right
consuming.
per person at that time.
Primarily through ultra high processed foods. I just want to say for everybody out there who hears the word mercury and immediately thinks of mercury in vaccines and autism and that whole topic that we have, many people have talked about for a lot of time. We're not going to really be addressing that today on this show because as Dr. Dufault is talking about, there's just a whole lot of mercury in ultra processed foods that it's a whole other source that we don't believe people are really addressing. So today we're really going to be focusing on how much mercury we're finding in our food. And I know I want you to keep going, but I just want to set the context personally. When Moms Across America tested school lunches last year, we tested 43 school lunch samples. Every single sample was positive for mercury, every single sample. So when you're talking about 60 pounds of corn syrup a year, we're looking at a lot of corn syrup and corn type products in school lunches and in the food supply. So we hear what you're saying. There's
and
a
I
lot
would add that none of that food was fish.
right.
Mercury in non-fish.
Yeah, non-fish
Right.
foods. Yes,
Yeah,
this was all burgers and tacos and quesadillas, and it was wheat products, a lot of wheat products, which we'll talk about. So, okay, so I want you to keep going, but that's what we're focusing on today is mostly mercury in processed foods.
Right. So the mercury in the fish was the current paradigm, and I was challenging that paradigm. Okay, and they didn't like that because they already knew that mercury was allowable in specific food ingredients. For example, there's a certain allowable level of mercury in the chlorine used to bleach flour. And so bleach flour could easily have mercury residues because of the allowable levels of mercury in the chlorine that's used to bleach the flour. So anything that you use bleach flour for, coating on chicken, snacks and goodies, all of that could have mercury residue. Well,
but how is mercury getting into the bleach flour?
Because they use mercury grade chloralkali products, chlorine. When they make chlorine, one of the ways that they make chlorine is using mercury. They have big vats of mercury as part of the process that splits the salt molecule apart. Sodium chloride, they have to do it through electrolysis, and they use mercury. Big
And
vats
is that
of mercury.
also for the high fructose corn syrup the same problem?
No, well, mercury gets into high fructose corn syrup a different way. It can get in there through the use of mercury grade chloralkali products, which is what I thought was the only way when I left FDA. But further research through the years, I have found that they intentionally add mercuric chloride to the cornstarch at the front end of the process to kill starch degrading enzymes that the bacteria.
Right?
Well, it's to prevent the breakdown of the cornstarch by enzymes produced by bacteria. They use it to kill the bacteria if there is.
To wipe out the enzymes, which sort of tells you something about what it might do to our enzymes, right?
Yeah.
They can knock out their enzymes.
So the bottom line is it gets in there a variety of ways. And for example, the petroleum-based food colors, they have allowable mercury in them too.
Yeah.
So
and there's a lot of mercury in petroleum, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, it just kind of carries over.
Okay, so I have a question about the bleach. Does the container of bleach that people often wash their kitchen floors with or pour down the toilet, does that have mercury in it?
It would depend if it was made by a mercury cell chloralkali plant, because there's two other ways to make chlorine. And these other two ways don't involve mercury. Okay. Now, the United States at the time that I was blowing the whistle had 9 mercury cell chloralkali plants left in the United States. At this time, they have only 1 or 2 left. there's 30 some odd chloralkali plants, mercury grade chloralkali plants in the world. And so what the US was doing is that they were closing their mercury cell plants, they were importing mercury grade chlorine and chloralkali products from other countries, right? So it's not like they're going to do away with it. The mercury grade chlorine, one high fructose corn syrup manufacturer told me the mercury grade chloralkali products were the best because it enhanced product shelf life. Well, heck, if you have a little mercury residue in your product, that's going to make sure you don't have mold growing or bacteria in your
it's a great biocide. And,
it's a biocide.
And so we've known for like 30 years that mercury and other heavy metals kill off the microbiome. Well, there are papers going back decades what an effective biocide it is. And let's not forget, as children, as parents, as the pediatrician, we used to use mercurochrome, which was toxic mercury, the organic mercury. And many microbes can convert with methyl groups, the inorganic to the organic mercury. So, those microbes play a key role in mercury metabolism. Maybe you also want to mention that somewhere too, Renee, regarding these different forms of mercury, because there's silver fillings,
Right.
mercury fillings.
Yeah.
There's
but it depends on the how you intake the mercury. So with mercury amalgam, when you chew, every time you chew, you get a release, and it goes up to your olfactory bulb. Okay, and one of the first research I ever did was at the Uniformed Services University, AFRI, Armed Forces Radiobiology Research Institute, where we did a study on human olfactory bulb of an Alzheimer patient, and one of a regular patient, sex matched, and found that the patient with the mercury amalgam had a whole bunch of mercury in their olfactory bulb and a lot of oxidative stress going on. So anyway, the bottom, I don't want to get off track, but that's one route of exposure. And then you have your dietary exposures, and your gut, the bacteria in your gut can, if you eat fish and it has methyl mercury, then the bacteria in your gut can demethylate it. It takes the methyl group away from that mercury. So you have, instead of a mercury atom with a carbon and hydrogen methyl group attached to it, that carbon hydrogen methyl group gets taken away by the bacteria in your gut. So then you end up with inorganic mercury in your gut. Now, if your gut is leaky because you're consuming a lot of high fructose corn syrup or for any other reason, then that inorganic mercury is going to flow in from your gut into your bloodstream, along with other heavy metals that you might have, right? So that's how you get these heavy metals in your bloodstream. So those bacteria in your gut can also methylate. They can do the reverse. They can add a methyl group to inorganic mercury that comes into your gut from maybe the mercury in the cookie from that somebody made with the bleached flour, right? So the bacteria do two things: they methylate and they demethylate. So you have a whole little community in your gut that takes the mercury compounds and does different things with them. So we've come a long way in understanding mercury toxicology. When I started, there was very little understanding. All they thought was the methyl mercury in the fish is what causes harmful birth outcomes. But now we know a lot more. It's the ultra processed foods and the heavy metals, the co-exposures to the lead, the mercury, the arsenic, the co-exposures, and then not to mention the role of pesticides. We have all these different co-exposures from ultra processed foods that are creating the problem in our guts and in our birth outcomes and whatnot. Did I answer your question on mercury species?
That was great.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Renee, thank you. Oh my gosh.
So can you expand a little bit more on how you mentioned bleached flour having mercury in it? Can you talk a little bit more about how mercury is getting into the food supply? It's not just bleached flour, is it? How is it getting into the food supply?
So mercury gets in the food supply when you use the chloralkali products to take vegetable oil, to make vegetable oils. So in order to extract the oil from the seed, then they'll use a petroleum-based compound or mercury grade caustic soda, so that can introduce mercury into vegetable oils. And vegetable oils are another, the USDA keeps track of our vegetable oil consumption. And last time I checked, it was about 28 pounds per person per year. So, when you're consuming a lot of fried things, and vegetable oils are also in cookies and stuff prepared, if you look on the food ingredient labels of cookies and crackers and whatnot, you will see, and potato chips, oh my God, first ingredient, vegetable oil, almost, or second ingredient. So vegetable oils, we consume a lot of when we're consuming those ultra processed foods. So that's another way that, and then of course the food colors, yellow 5, numbers yellow 5, yellow 6, and red 40. They're made with petrochemicals, and so they're certified by FDA. And so FDA actually has a process where every batch of those particular food colors that is manufactured must be analyzed and tested to make sure they do not contain more than the allowable levels. So they're allowed to contain up to 10 parts per million lead, 3 parts per million arsenic, and 1 part per million mercury. Why are they allowed to contain these heavy metals? Well, they are expected to contain some heavy metals because they're made with petroleum.
And that's also the hexane, which hexane itself is also very toxic. And they use the hexane, which comes from petroleum, and which is probably going to have mercury contamination along with it. So you can see why these vegetable oils, I get annoyed with papers that talk about omega-6 fats and vegetable oils and sort of saying they're bad because of the omega-6, but I wonder how much of what makes them bad is these toxic ingredients that end up in the processing.
That's exactly right.
It's a hot topic. Those seed oils are a hot topic in terms of nutrition because we're trying to steer parents away from seed oils in general and back to either cooking with, lard.
Exactly. That's what we used to use back in the old days.
Or cold pressed. If you do cold pressed, olive oil cold pressed, then you're going to avoid the chemical.
And Dr. McCullough, who we have a tremendous respect for, he's been on the seed oil rampage lately. A lot of his articles on his website have dealt with seed oils, but I'm not saying cooking oils, they have a lot of other side effects when you heat up these seed oils. But it could be the undeclared heavy metals because we have these.
And the hexane, I mean, all these different combinations of things that are coming out of that petroleum product, that's really critical. And a lot of the things that are synthetic are coming from petroleum, and you don't know what else is going to get in there, And
none of those levels that you've just spoke about are safe. None of them. There should be 0 mercury, 0 lead, 0 levels for children. There is no safe level of mercury or lead for a child.
And you were just talking about parts per million too, not parts per billion.
Right. Yeah.
So those were very high levels.
That's very shocking.
Way over what the EPA.
And that's what the law allows, Code of Federal Regulation.
But it's so interesting how the tail wags the dog, because typically what they do, like when the companies find out that there's more glyphosate than hitting above the limit, they go pester the regulators to say, hey, you got to raise the limit because here we are seeing more in here than what you allow. They don't want to be disobeying the law, so they say, hey, you got to raise the limit. So they do it, and they've done it by factor of 10, factor of 20. The limits of what's allowed in certain foods goes up because the industry finds that there's more in the food than what's allowed, and they don't want to be against the law.
So speaking of which, what's allowed for mercury by the EPA in drinking water is 0.002
Interesting.
micrograms per kilogram, UG per kg, right? That's micrograms?
Yes.
Yeah, 0.002. And what did you just say was allowed in vegetable oils?
1, right?
Well, I don't know about vegetable oils. I haven't seen that particular regulation. I'm not even sure they.
You just mentioned some numbers, 2 parts per million.
That was
the corn syrup, right?
No, the food colors, yellow 5, 6,
colors.
red 40. So they don't even have standards for allowable mercury. They have 1 part per million allowable mercury in the bleach used to bleach flour. Okay, so they have standards for in the bleach used to bleach flour, there can be 1 part per million mercury. So the thing is, they don't have standards for allowable mercury in everything. only certain things where they expect to find it, where they
Right,
expect to find
exactly.
it. So then they don't follow through with, okay, if you allow 1 part per million mercury in the chlorine used to bleach flour, then how much mercury are you going to allow in the products that are first ingredient is bleached flour, the bread, right?
Yeah.
How much mercury is allowed? So they don't carry through
Yeah.
and follow that mercury trail. You know, there's a mercury cycle, and it just,
Yeah.
you know, it goes everywhere.
It's really only once somebody stirs up the soup and says, hey, there's a problem here, that they start to realize they need to have a limit on it, right? They're sort
Yeah.
of
Oh my
reactive rather than
goodness.
proactive.
Well,
So just for
before,
example, 1 parts per million equals 1,000 parts per billion. 0.002 goes into that 500,000 times.
That's amazing.
So what the EPA allows, would that be 500,000 times less? Is that how you would say that? Then
In the water, right?
in the water of
Oh,
their
in the water.
Then in
than
that,
what's allowed in food dyes.
in the ingredient, that the 1 part per million was in the ingredient that's used to process or something like that, right? Is that right?
Yeah, the 1 part per million is in the chlorine that's used to bleach flour. But you're saying that EPA allows mercury in water, but it's way less.
Way less. Way less.
0.002. That's what
Yeah.
the EPA allows in water. So what I'm saying is the amount that's used to bleach flour is 500,000 times. It's when you divide it out, it's 500,000 times what they allow in drinking water.
And then you found much, much higher levels in the food than what's allowed in drinking
yes,
water.
we found 0.02, we found 2.0, we found 2.5, 1.5. So yeah, that's twice as high. So that would be 1,000,000 times, right? If it's two parts, no, that's 2 parts per million. So it would be 2,000 parts per billion, which would well anyway, it's still twice.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
With looking for the mercury in the processed food, this is just an interesting little ditty. But way back when I was still at the FDA and doing this investigation, the FDA does a food basket survey every year where they test food in the food supply for heavy metal contaminants. But they choose, where would you expect to find mercury? Well, they would test fish products.
Fish, exactly. Yeah.
So they wouldn't test cereal, that with the food colors, or they wouldn't be testing the ultra processed foods for the mercury, only specific things. So that the paradigm at the time was that, the mercury in the fish is what we have to worry about. Yeah. And that was a very convenient paradigm because, then they're not looking at the mercury, even though they knew it was allowed, but they didn't want that information out. And so at the time, the average American was consuming 60 pounds per year of high fructose corn syrup, which is in Coca-Cola and Pepsi and orange soda and, all these products, first ingredient. Well, the Americans have reduced their consumption of high fructose corn syrup to about 20 something pounds per year. So they have cut it in half,
Mm-hmm.
But the bottom line is when you're only eating a pound or two of broccoli or kale, these foods that are supposed to be good for you, and you're eating, 20 some odd pounds a year of vegetable oil and 20 some odd pounds a year of high fructose corn syrup, and then almost 90 pounds a year of wheat, you see where the response, the toxic response is coming from these foods that we're eating a lot of.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Industrial food-like products, they're not really food. We've heard that there's
food-like products, yes.
thing is junk food. There's junk and there's food. And what Zen also highlighted in her school lunch study is that these foods, in addition to the heavy metals, are nutritionally devoid of minerals. And when minerals are low, that allows the heavy metals to be more toxic for children because those minerals, zinc, iron, selenium, magnesium, are protective against heavy metals. And we know the foods are low. We know kids are low. You can tell by their activity, by their physical exams, by their lab results, and by their behavior. So we've got a perfect storm. This is the perfect storm.
Absolutely. And high fructose corn syrup, and not just high fructose corn syrup, but yellow 5 and 6, those three ingredients have been shown to lead to zinc losses.
Mm.
So you can have eat a lot of a certain product that has any of these ingredients, and then that could reduce your overall zinc load in your body. And you need zinc. Zinc is important for your immune system. It's important to build the metallothionein proteins, which are the heavy metal carrier proteins, right?
Yeah.
So
these,
it's not just that these ingredients give you exposures to heavy metals. They also reduce your zinc levels or your calcium. You know, a USDA researchers came out with a study and found that calcium was low once humans were consuming high fructose corn syrup. So, you know, that's a problem when these junk foods, the ultra processed foods, are while they're sources of heavy metal and pesticide exposure, they're also messing with your metabolism and taking out, you know, reducing important minerals that you need to have health.
And I want to say something about high fructose corn syrup, because, you know, we had heard, oh, fructose is bad. Fructose is bad. We got that message and people were trying not to eat fructose. High fructose corn syrup has only a little bit more fructose than sugar does, the regular sugar. You know, it's 50-50 slanting one way versus the other, but there's not that much difference. And people, again, didn't appreciate that it's the toxic exposures that are contaminants that are in these foods that are making them bad for you, not necessarily the fructose, you know? So you blame the actual, you blame the
mineral imbalances, that create the mineral imbalances.
Yeah.
So and we don't understand all the mechanisms.
We certainly don't. And of course, once you get combinations of different toxic exposures working together, all kinds of complicated things happen. And we have there's almost zero studies of things in combination. You know, it's already overwhelming just to identify what that particular chemical does to the body by itself. And then once you start combining it with everything else.
And you call those co-exposures, right? When mercury and other heavy metals are exposed together and they cause problems together. Dr. Michelle Pero, can you talk a little bit about what are the symptoms that someone might see in their child with mercury or other heavy metal exposure? What type of symptoms do you see as a pediatrician?
So, you know, everyone has in their mind that there's a heavy metal exposure, that it's an acute exposure. Like, you know, you just ate, you know, breathe in, actually mercury vapors are worse than even eating it, but you just ate like the thermometer that broke. Remember when we were kids, thermometer break and you'd play with the mercury and maybe you ate it. So those acute exposures, those are kids get really sick, and they might have dizziness, vomiting, numbness, muscle cord, lack of coordination. It's a very different thing, and that's not what we normally see. What we normally see are chronic exposures, and they're cumulative too. So you accumulate these heavy metals over time. The cumulative, let's talk about mercury, because they're all a little different, but they're cumulative as all the heavy metals, as we just mentioned. They're mostly neurologic and your central nervous system, and they can include anything from an anxiety, depression, memory loss, neurologic issues, which is motor issues, even fine motor issues. The kids might have even kind of issues with hopefully not their kidney, because mercury could also affect kidney function, and those are often hard to pick up because you need a kidney test, like a urine analysis, and look for protein to see if there's been any kidney damage. Mercury tends to like the kidney, the brain, and the central nervous system. So it may just look like a kid with ADHD, or a kid who's acting out, or a kid who's excessively irritable. The things that happen all over long term and long time might be thyroid dysfunction. Mercury can damage the thyroid, and we can talk about that, Stephanie.
Don't we have a study? Can we show that? Don't we have a study showing mercury and thyroid damage? Yeah.
And we know that there is a pandemic of thyroid disease, particularly in women, but it's happening in boys too. Both thyroid disease, autoimmune thyroid disease like Hashimoto and Graves' disease, and thyroid cancer. All of it has gone skyrocketing, loss of hair, eyebrow issues, and you can even get skin changes from mercury. But lead causes other issues, but those are the main mercury ones that we tend to see in general. And back in the day, we used to use these silver amalgams. We know they were a heavy metal mix, mostly of mercury. Many people now in our age groups, not yours, Zen, I know you're a bit younger, may have had a lot of issues with metals. I certainly was an amalgam achiever.
No,
Got
I had
them out now.
I had
But
mercury in my mouth. Yep.
we had mercury in our mouth, and our dentists were removing the mercury with all those vapors coming out, which go right to the brain.
Yeah,
So-
that's really scary.
And I just want to say one more thing, and then we could shift off, is be clear. During mercury gets into the breast milk. It crosses into the placenta. So be clear, it affects the fetus. So mercury is not benign. I don't let pre-pregnancy and pregnant women eat fish at all. Zero, none.
Which is too bad because it's healthy, right? And fish
I
is
know.
good for the brain. It's really a shame that it's
It's
got
a
that
shame.
mercury in there because of the runoff.
But we do know, and maybe we'll defer this back to Renee, that mercury is linked with neurocognitive disorders in children like autism. It's no doubt. Data is clear. Mercury
Right.
and lead. So maybe this be a good time to shift into that.
We created a model back in 2005, 6 at FDA. I did it, did the groundwork, and then I recruited co-authors, which we didn't get to publish till I retired. But the bottom line is, and this model has come along all these years because it keeps getting added to, because it's evidence-based. I mean, there's more clinical trials, and we just know more and more how things are working in our children's bodies. Well, every child that has autism throughout the world, the studies that have been done have shown that they have, compared to their neurotypical peers, the kids that don't have autism, the kids with autism have higher mercury and higher lead in their blood. They might also have other things like aluminum, or, there could be other issues, but they always have mercury and lead. And then the kids with ADHD, and then studies that have been done all over the world, show that they always have elevated levels of lead. Okay. So these are biomarkers that physicians could actually test for. And we actually wrote a paper on providing the guidance on the analytical methods that they could use to determine these levels in the child's blood. Because if you change their diet, then you could see that they have improvements in behavior. If you take them off the ultra-processed foods, then you're going to see that their behavior calm down, their behaviors. Like one of the symptoms of heavy metal exposure is pica. You'll have a kid chewing on stuff, pencils, and that doesn't help because there's lead in the pencil, right? But, pica is chewing on just the need to chew. And so anyway, bottom line is, if you change your diet, then you see improvements in behavior. That's been shown. And you got to reduce those sources of heavy metal exposure. And
what's so shocking, Renee, is what we learned when we've done past shows on New MDs, and when we featured Moms Across American Zen study, is that just by removing ultra-processed foods and switching kids to whole foods, organic regenerative foods, we would eliminate the bulk of issues. Maybe we can show that beautiful graph that you did in your book, your epigenetics book. Maybe our producer can bring that graph up, that beautiful graph. But it's been highlighted in Zen studies, been highlighted in your work, getting off processed foods. It's not rocket science that kids should not be eating these foods, not to mention these foods of the metals. And
can you explain this graph? Sorry.
Oh, that was a good one. If you go back to that, so people understand.
Explain it.
Yeah. So what I've been doing through the years, and this is the most recent paper in 2023, I review the U.S. Department of Education special education caseload data. So every state in the union, in order to get the federal money to supplement their special ed programs, they have to submit the numbers of children that are receiving special education services for different learning disabilities. And so autism and developmental delay go hand in hand. So if a child is under the age of 8 or 9, it might seem like they're autistic, but then they might get special education services under developmental delay category, okay? So after looking at all the data for all the 50 states between the years of 2006 and 2021, what I found was there was this quadrupling of developmental delay in the United States. And that's very serious because that goes hand in hand with autism. In autism, there was like a tripling of cases of autism. And this was occurring while the special education, actually occurring while the population in the schools, the actual school enrollment. So the school enrollment was level. It's flat. It's not like we're having lots and lots of kids in the schools. In fact, enrollment is going down. So we're seeing, while enrollment is flat or going down, we're seeing increases in developmental delay, increases in autism, other health impairments. That's where ADHD kids get their services. So you see, we're seeing these increases. And when you look at all the other possible categories for special education, whether their kid is having trouble hearing, they're blind, whatever, the majority of the kids are now receiving services. 49% of children, 49% are receiving services.
Can I just add in here something that is actually much worse than that? You can take that screen down for a minute. I was at a Children's Health Defense Conference 2 weeks ago, and a preschool teacher came up to me. She said she has 15 kids in her class. 13 of them are on the autism spectrum. So I believe
that's not
it is
surprising.
Much greater than 50% right now.
Yeah,
we
and
are
could well be
in an epidemic right now. And Stephanie Seneff has pointed out by looking at the charts, I believe it's Swanson's work, that if we do not do something about this, 1 out of 2 of our children are going to have autism by 2035. Is that correct, Stephanie?
2032, the children born in 2032 will end up, so it's not in 2032, it won't be 1 or 2, but those children will end up with half of them having autism. If we continue with the current trends, which is just absolutely shocking. And I can't get people to wake up on this. It fascinates me that this is not a national epidemic. I mean, that we don't have
this is why this show is so important.
No crisis.
I think this is why this
no crisis,
Right. This is
we're seeing transgenerational epigenetic inheritance now, if you can put that model up. Now we've got the data showing that what mother eats determines, like if she's eating a lot of ultra processed foods with all these ingredients we've been talking about, then she's going to get dietary lead and mercury exposures and other heavy metals. And then these heavy metals are going to be bioaccumulating in her blood, and that this ultra processed food is leading to mineral imbalances, calcium and zinc losses, and that interferes with our ability to excrete the heavy metals. Right, with the zinc loss, your metallothionein heavy metal transporter protein doesn't work right, so you get the bioaccumulation in your blood, and the blood goes to all the organs. And so then you're getting this heavy metal accumulation in your brain cells, and you're going to see changes in methylation patterns, which that's when how your mother's metabolism just transfers to the child. So through the cord blood, not only does the child get the heavy metal exposure, but how the mother's genes are behaving. If the mother's having less ability to excrete these heavy metals, so will the child. Okay. So this is called transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. How the mom's genes are behaving is being transferred to the child, and this is causing more children in the U.S. to have autism and ADHD and developmental delay. And that's just the one gene, metallothionein PON1 gene, which is the important gene is calcium dependent, and that gene needs to work proper so we can break down and excrete the organophosphate pesticide exposure we're getting from all the wheat we're eating. So, that's a whole nother system that's being disrupted, and it's a mess. And we've seen accelerated rates of autism, because in our last study we analyzed the CDC's data on the 8-year-old kids, and what we saw was that the rates We're accelerating.
Yeah.
And that's different from increasing. Accelerated rates are different. That's very alarming.
It's nearly exponential. And I want to say the methylation pathways is very important. I think glyphosate's a major contributor to that. It's been shown that glyphosate, we know it suppresses the production of the aromatic amino acids through this, this EPSP synthase and shikimate pathway. We've heard a lot about that on glyphosate, but it also suppresses methionine synthesis from inorganic sulfur by the gut microbes and also by the plants. So you end up with methionine deficiency in the plants, and then an inability to convert inorganic sulfur to methionine in the gut, which becomes important. Methionine is the universal methyl donor. So you end up with deficiencies in the supply of methyl groups, which then ends up with hypomethylation in the developmental brain. And hypomethylation is going to mess up. This is the epigenetic effects that's going to show up as things like autism.
What Zen started to say, which reminds me why we began this show over a year ago. We're on episode 14. And we started thinking that we have to shift it to creating another parallel paradigm to get information directly into the hands of parents, moms, dads, families, eaters, because we have the information, we have the data, we have the pathways, and yet our regulatory agencies, which are aware, as you Dr. Dufault and others have pointed out, Stephanie for years, Zen and I have been screening from the mountaintops for a few decades, and yet regulatory agencies have failed us and knowingly lockstep with industry and sacrificing our children who are chronically poisoned. Let's be clear. Can we just call it out what it is? Our children are being daily dosed, chronically poisoned via their school lunches, via the supermarkets, through air pollution, water, picket. And so now what we're trying to do is give families, parents, eaters, the tools they need, the science, the information, and the tools on how to bypass the system because the system is not doing its job. Did I say that accurately, especially to my cohorts here, whom we've been at this for over a year? Zen.
No, absolutely. That's what I was saying. This is why this show is so important, because most people only think about mercury in vaccines and fish. And what we are trying to get across here with this amazing book, Unsafe at Any Meal, is that it's in highly processed foods. And what you're saying, Dr. Dufault, is that it's mostly in the wheat and the vegetable oils. What other highly processed foods? Can we name them out just so we're not just saying
yellow 5, yellow 6, red 40.
Food dyes
and corn syrups. We don't know. We can't rule them out because our study was duplicated by Canadian scientists. So
that infant formula, Renee. I mean, the number one.
Oh yeah,
the corn syrup solids.
Corn syrup solids. Yeah,
in infant formula. So that, I mean, I think there's a study screaming waiting to be had. We need to test infant formulas for heavy metals. No doubt that is been looming now in my mind as a follow-up to, Moms Across America's studies, that this needs to be looked at pronto because babies are so susceptible and they have such low levels or zero of the enzymes necessary to detoxify. So they are particularly at risk. Or not even protecting our babies. And by 6 months, remember, half of women in America are no longer breastfeeding. They breastfeed till about 6 months, and then about 50% drop off. And so we're feeding them these processed commercial infant formulas, unless moms want to make their own.
Most people don't. Let me just tell you right now.
So difficult. I know Weston Price does a great job. I can give people a link. We can put it in our show notes. It's really challenging. Organic formulas. We'll check those out too for heavy metals, super expensive. If you've got a nursing friend, breast milk banks, it becomes really tricky on what to feed babies. So to avoid these heavy metals. And so giving them the nutrition they need so they have working gut, so hopefully they can excrete. So if your gut is working and kids have a robust microbiome and they don't have leaky gut, which many kids do, they might be able to handle some of the metals.
Yeah.
I'm not encouraging metals in the diet, folks, so hold on. But it's to get to zero, I'd say would be impossible.
What mother eats is so important before she gets pregnant and then during pregnancy and then breastfeeding. Whatever mom eats, she's going to be passing on to her child.
Yeah, and Mercury goes
so
fast.
So important that mom is eating a diet of whole organic foods. And it needs to be that way if you're going to have the very best child health and learning outcomes.
So there's what moms eat, mom eats, and then there's genetics, or is the MT and PON1, which is your specialization, is that genetics, or is that something that, can you explain that? Is that something that is affected by food?
What mom eats determines how those two genes behave, period.
Can you
the
explain
PON1
those
gets
genes?
suppressed by mercury. PON1 gets suppressed by mercury, and PON1 detoxifies the insecticides. So you can't detoxify the insecticides when you've got the mercury poisoning, and then you've got everything working together to become more toxic.
And it's not just methyl mercury, inorganic mercury, lead. Heavy metals suppress PON1. So does fructose. Fructose suppresses PON1.
Really? Wow.
So you really have to eat a clean diet to get your PON1 working right. And then that'll help you with the pesticides you're getting, like they're spraying the roadsides with glyphosate and whatnot. You know, if you're eating a whole
it won't
diet,
metabolize glyphosate.
then you're gonna malathion or whatever.
Yeah, malathion. It'll definitely help with that, but not
if you want that PON1 gene to work properly, you got to have the nutrients in the whole food diet.
And newborns only may have 0 to 1/3 to 1/4 of the PON1 activity of adults. It's really absent to low in babies, so they cannot metabolize these things, as well as organophosphates, insecticides, and all the other pesticides found in food, not just the Roundup, which is that's bad enough, but the average food contains 6 pesticides. And as that study showed, in school lunches, 95.3% of them had glyphosate, but I think you found then 29 other pesticides. Am I correct?
29 other harmful pesticides. And I'm seeing here in our show notes that organophosphates, that exposure, pesticide exposure, it's not just glyphosate, impact the PON1 and the neural developmental process in school age children. That's in the Chamaka study. And that's another thing that, I love the glyphosate free residue, project label. That's great. But there are other organophosphate pesticides, as you're saying.
And can we put the wheat silos
effects? What?
The wheat silos picture up?
Oh, yeah.
Have that? Yeah. Okay. So with the wheat in America, the law allows them to store wheat in these silos for up to 5 years. Conventionally grown wheat. That means they're using pesticides. Okay, so they use malathion, which is an organophosphate pesticide, and they apply it in the silos as much as needed, several times a year. Okay.
And why do they do that? For pests, for bugs? What is it?
For grasshoppers. The insecticide. They don't want the larvae hatching and whatnot. Now, organic flour, so organic wheat, the law says you have to keep that in a silo for only 1 year, and it has to be refrigerated. So they keep the organic wheat in the refrigerated silo, and for only 1 year.
That is so interesting. This is
they're not using the pesticides. Okay.
This is how
if the average American is eating 89, 90 pounds of wheat per year, and it's all conventional, then they're going to have malathion exposure. And the U.S. Pesticide Data Program, they test periodically. They test the bags of flour, wheat flour, and 25%. Then the last testing, 2018, 25% of the wheat flour was contaminated with malathion, which is an organophosphate pesticide. The hundreds of bags of wheat. Are you going to buy? You don't know if the bag of flour you're buying at the store is one of those that contains that, right?
And
there's also aspergillus, the fungus issue with the wheat, right? And that's also much more common with the non-organic wheat. They've had big problems with that, with non-organic wheat, but not with organic wheat. The fungicide. Then you put the fungicide in there too.
And, let's not forget the work of Brenda Eskenazi down in Salinas in California, a growing region. And Brenda's been looking at this, the issues of organophosphates for 20 years, following those kids prospectively for 2 decades. And they have some of the highest rates of ADHD in children, poor birth outcomes, children born with low motor tone, really kind of floppy kids. And the moms are sick from organophosphate poisoning. So she's been looking at, and so glyphosate is a type of organophosphate.
Right. Thank you. And
let's get
so,
time.
yeah, so it actually has, glyphosate has the same effect that the organophosphates have with acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. And that makes acetylcholine build up, and that causes toxicity in the neurons. And glyphosate does that, and the organophosphates do that as well. But glyphosate cannot be metabolized by PON1. That's the distinction between it and the organophosphates, because that phosphonate makes a much different situation to break it down. It's got this CP bond. Because of the phosphonate, it's not easy to break it down. And so PON1 won't touch glyphosate, but it'll break down those other ones, but then it gets suppressed by the toxic metals. So we're getting it every which way, you know.
And boys are very deficient in PON1. The baby boys, and that's why we have more
Why is
autism.
that? Can you tell us why do boys have less PON1 than girls?
It's a sexual, it's a difference in gender. It's just been established many, many, many years ago.
And that matters because the rates of autism in boys are 4-to-1 in boys to girls. Now that levels were kind of evening out a bit, but in general it's 4-to-1. So
I think the testosterone plays a big role there, because there's an enzyme that converts testosterone to estrogen, and that it's called aromatase, and that enzyme has been shown in multiple studies to be suppressed by glyphosate. It's a member of the cytochrome P450 family. Glyphosate suppresses all of the cytochrome P450 enzymes. So the aromatase actually produces estrogen in the brain from the testosterone, whereas the females have the benefit that they already have a lot more estrogen to begin with. So their brain becomes protected in ways from the estrogen that the boys lack. And they lack more estrogen because of the disruption of that enzyme by the glyphosate.
We are solutionaries on this show. Maybe then it's time we get into some solutions.
We need some solutions.
I want to make sure that people understand that the reason why boys have more autism than girls is because they have less of this PON1 gene. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
It's not just that. It's not just that. It's the environmental factors. It is the toxic burden of all of these things. Because they could have less of the PON1 gene, but and not have these environmental exposures and not get glyphosate, right? I mean, sorry, not get autism. They have glyphosate on the base. They could not get autism, right?
They've shown in a clinical trial of boys tracking prenatal exposures to mercury, and then as the pregnancy went on, and then the child outcomes all the way through childhood. And so the boys, the mercury exposure, prenatal mercury exposure that mom has, it impacts the PON1 gene. And that is, it does that in boys. They found that in boys. And then the boys had the poor cognition and the developmental delays in mid-childhood. They didn't find that association in the girls. So the mechanism for the autism in boys and ADHD is well established, at least by that study. Cardenas did it, and he's had some follow-up studies too. His name is Cardenas, and that's just unbelievable. I mean, it's like, wow. So mercury is known to lead to changes in methylation patterns in boys and changes in PON1 gene activity.
And I want to come back to the thyroid story, because women who have hypothyroidism have a 4-fold increased risk to having an autistic child. And the thyroid accumulates mercury. There was an amazing study that I found in preparation for the show that showed that the number of people who tested positive for mercury in their thyroid went up substantially with age. So that when you're below 30, it's only like 4%. But when you go 30 to 60, it comes up to like 9%. But when you're over 60, it's like 38% of the people had mercury in their thyroid. Mercury in the thyroid is going to disrupt the thyroid hormone, and that's going to cause this deficiency in thyroid that's going to lead to the autistic child.
Mm-hmm. And not to mention iodine deficiency with those mineral deficiencies, and then the thyroid also needs selenium.
Yes.
So
right.
No iodine, no selenium.
And the thyroid hormone itself comes from the shikimate pathway. That's a direct hit from glyphosate.
So, but let's talk about some solutions. And maybe you want to kind of begin with the bow. Maybe we could tie this up and present some digestible bites for listeners.
Well, you just started to mention some iodine, and what was the other thing? Selenium that just mentioned.
Selenium we mentioned with the Brazil nuts. Even kids can give a Brazil nut a day. You can even grind them up and put in their smoothie if they don't like the nuts. And iodine. Remember, chlorine, bromine compete with iodine. So a lot of people are deficient in iodine. And so, algae is a very good, like a lot of the kids eat seaweed as long as it's not heavy metal contaminated. A lot, they sell those packs of organic seaweed now, but they're organic, but they don't test them for heavy metals. So I don't like giving
That's so
kids
frustrating.
tons of seaweed, maybe once a week of some seaweed. What I do recommend to test for iodine is not so easy, but there is a simple test you can do. It's not an exact test, but you can put 1 drop of Lugol's iodine or iodoral on your forearm, is because the forearm skin absorbs really well
Oh,
because it's so
interesting.
thin,
That's an
and see
interesting
how
way.
quickly it takes for you to absorb up that iodine. And it's a kind of an indirect way of looking about whether you have a need for iodine for you or your children. So iodine is really helpful. And, honestly, nowadays I put mostly all kids on a multivitamin, multimineral, in addition to changing their food to organic, regenerative, whole food diet, no or minimal processed foods when possible, do best parents can. But I use a lot of multiminerals, multivitamins, yes, because I find most kids have issues.
The thing is that the minerals in the soil are going down, the minerals in the foods are going down. So we actually almost have to supplement, which I find really frustrating because you want to just let the food be
Yes,
supply everything you need. But these days it's hard to do that, even
so
with the organics.
and this is one of my favorite quotes. I've used it extensively. I, I, I just feel like this is what we've done, and now we're paying the price. Our food is grown to poisons, and now we're trying to mitigate the poison toxic effects with multivitamins and minerals, and giving our kids algae instead of giving them fish oil. I put kids on DHA from algae instead of fish oils. Number one, because the fish oils can't be contaminated. Number two, I worry about overfishing and what the fish are eating. And not to mention, here is my plea. Can we teach pediatricians nutrition? We have to take CME courses. And at the end of the year, to renew your medical license, you often have to do like some extra training in, no problem with opiates. We had to do extra in opiates. Why don't we have to do extra training in nutrition? Every pediatrician should be updated, mandated on nutrition counseling, because I had 2 hours in med school. So this is imperative, and it's not coming from the AAP. It's not coming from the EPA. It's not coming from the FDA. It's not coming from anywhere. So we need to train people on nutrition. Now, Renee, we know you've been training families directly. We're trying to train families here on nutrition. What we're doing is food is medicine, food is nutrition. That's what we're doing. And we're trying to show that the reasons why our food supplies become contaminated, and loss of regulatory control and a free-for-all by industry with lack of commercial oversight has created a mess. That was my big Mike moment. I just had to get that
out. Mess. That's for sure. It is a mess. And what we're doing on the new MDs is uncovering and exposing the truth. Thank you, Dr. Renee Dufault, for your amazing book about
that was fabulous. Thank
you. Exposure of heavy metals in food. It's not just in fish and vaccines, folks. It is in highly processed foods. It's in food dyes. I did not know that. And in corn syrup. And how many corn products are there in our food? You're saying we eat an average of 60 pounds of corn products and corn syrup per year. Parents, did you know this? When you hand your kids a highly processed food dye, like Skittles or, snacks with highly processed with corn syrup in it.
There you go.
That's my nemesis. I see parents with kids with autism handing them Skittles as a treat. Yeah, and teachers, by the way, we need you to stop giving our children these food dye, corn syrup based, highly processed food snacks. Please, teachers, give them, organic strawberries, organic dried mangoes, organic fruit, organic grapes, right? You can give them other treats besides, or, pencils, or something that is, useful that they can use. Okay. So we definitely need to be looking at solutions, but we do need to expose the mess first. And so we need to be brave and courageous and get the word out. I'm so grateful to have people that have gone down the rabbit holes in places that I have never been. And to hear you talk about it in a way that makes sense to other people. Sometimes, Stephanie, I still need to keep up. I need to read.
Sorry.
It doesn't quite make sense to me, but I'm glad it makes sense to you, and that you can see, I can see that you can see the dots coming together, and I can see it all makes sense to you, how this is happening. And it's very clear to me from listening to you, Dr. Seneff and Dr. Perro and Dr. Dufault, that we can end this autism epidemic. We do not have to have a future where in 2032, 1 out of 2 of those children are destined to have autism. That does not have to happen. We can absolutely turn that around. We just need to fix the food supply and the environmental exposure to these toxins. And if everybody out there shares this and calls their senators and representatives, tells their food companies, we're not going to be buying this junk, we can shift the marketplace. But all we need is a 15% shift, according to Jeffrey Smith, right?
Right. The tipping point.
Yeah.
And you know what we should say also regarding those little Skittles were in Lunchables. And, you know, as Zen pointed out, Lunchables won the school lunch award craft. And so here we are directly feeding our kids toxic stuff, because in the old little Lunchables, there used to be a pack of Skittles in there. There are 51 ingredients in that average Lunchable. So that needs to stop immediately. This Lunchables to school lunch thing needs to never happen. And number 2, this is the call out to soccer moms. Forget the candy for soccer kids. How about some oranges? Mom, if you're the mom bringing the fruit, I used to bring the food sometimes, bring oranges.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We do need to wrap it up. We're a minute over, but thank you, Dr. Renee. So great to have you on. Thank you, everybody. Please check out her book. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, and Dr. Seneff and Dr. Perro, we really appreciate you. Thank you for being with us on the new MDs. Join us next month. Are we going to be talking about cancer next month?
I hope so. Glyphosate and pediatric cancer, blood cancers.
I think we're going to dig deep into the children's cancer topic. It's time. Wrap up the year with a bang.
It's not, it's not fun, but that looks like what we're going to be talking about. If you want to give suggestions to us, please contact us through GMO Science or momsacrossamerica.org or Stephanie Seneff's website. We would love to hear from you. Thank you all for being with us today. Thank you to our producer, Anne, and we appreciate all of you who have commented and who have been watching and sharing the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.